We're gonna pretend like the class just started right now. Okay, I'm gonna start sharing my screen again. Sorry, you guys. I need to be better. I can't let you down. Okay. So, yes. Another type of impact evaluation question could be, does increasing the minimum wage reduce income inequality? So that's obviously a cause and effect question because we want to know what the effect is of a minimum wage increase on our outcome variable income inequality. Do you guys kind of understand what cause and effect questions are and how they apply to impact evaluations? Okay. So within impact evaluation, there are several types that we can choose from, which we will talk about throughout the semester. But how do we know which one to choose? This is a really important question, and it depends a lot on the context of our study, the rules of the program operation, and the general setup. So basically, a good impact evaluation design can almost always be found when we have clear rules of operation of the program. We have kept good monitoring, and the impact evaluation is planned early in the process of the design of the implementation. So having clear and well-defined rules of these program operations is really important for program management and also good public policy decisions. And especially it's important because without strong knowledge of the process of our program and without knowledge of people's outcomes before the treatment effect, we don't have a good comparison group. So we really need this setup to have a strong comparison group and to find causal inference. Okay. Am I talking too fast or are we still good?
It's okay.
Okay, thank you. What the heck? I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Okay. Also, it's raining right now. I don't think I've ever seen it rain in Pira since I've lived here. So that's kind of fun. Okay. So, yeah, as I said earlier, the choice of an impact evaluation method should be determined by the characteristics of the program, such as available resources, eligibility criteria for beneficiaries. So how do we choose who will receive the program and how do we choose who will not receive the program? And also the timing of the program implementation. This will set us up for different types of strategies to be used. No, not too much. Okay. So of course, an important part of estimating an effect is knowing the control group. So we're going to talk about that more in the next chapter, but we need a control group to compare within an impact evaluation. And so this group should have no change in treatment status. They should not be affected by treatment at all. And that way we can compare the group that receives treatment to this group to find the true effect the policy has on a given population. Yeah. Okay. So in an ideal setting, in a perfect world, our control group would be duplicates, the exact same as our treatment group, but they don't receive treatment. However, in real life, we're never going to find someone identical to us. We're all beautiful, unique snowflakes. So that's not possible. So we need to find some way to make a control group that looks as similar as possible to our treatment group. Yeah. Okay, so topic 4 we're going to talk about prospective versus retrospective evaluations. Before I flip the page, does anyone know what that is? A prospective or retrospective evaluation? Okay, well, let's find out. Okay, so conducting an impact evaluation, there are two ways, prospectively or retrospectively. Prospective evaluation is always the best. This is when we start our evaluation at the same time that the program is being built or being designed. So this allows us to collect data all the way throughout the program, at the very beginning to the very end, which is really important because when we have data at the beginning, we know the baseline. We call it the baseline because it's the beginning before anyone receives treatment. And that means that, for example, we have a group that we had before and after treatment that receives treatment and one that doesn't. So having that before data is really important in a lot of scenarios and sets us up well for a lot of analysis types. However, if we have retrospective evaluation, it's performed after the program is implemented. So for example, I'm interested at looking at the effect of maybe SARS in 2000 because it seems relevant for COVID today. So I have to use data that already exists from early 2000s and try and analyze the effect. Obviously, I don't have baseline data, so I'll need to use different strategies to create a control group. Of course, they're a lot more difficult, but that doesn't mean they're not useful because they can be important policy questions regardless. So usually when we have retrospective evaluations, we need to use some sort of quasi-natural experiment, they call it, which is exploiting some type of exogenous variation. Can anyone tell me what the difference between exogenous and endogenous means, just to be clear? Anyone? Okay. Exogenous with the X, exogenous is when it's not related to the system. So it's independent of your regression or your equation. Endogenous means it's related somehow. So for example, my age is probably related with my income. So yeah, I don't know, I can't think of a good example right now. But we want exogenous variation because it's independent from our regression of interest. And so we want to use this exogenous variation to find causal inference, which we'll talk a lot more in the future. So it might seem confusing now, but you'll understand it perfectly in a couple of months. Okay. So basically, prospective impact evaluations, the one where we collect data before and all the way through, is more likely to produce strong and credible evaluation results for three reasons. The first reason is that we have baseline data, so data before the treatment is given. And so that gives us the measures of our outcome of interest before the program has started. So when we have pre-treatment outcomes, we can ensure that the treatment and control group are comparable. So for example, if we want our treatment and control group to be identical, we can compare different characteristics all before the treatment even exists. So we can say, well, all of these observable characteristics are the same, so clearly we can find a causal effect. And then a second reason, it defines measures of a program success in the program planning stage. It focuses both the program and the evaluation on the intended results. So basically we can establish clear objectives and well-defined measures of a program success. So for instance, when we have a retrospective study, it's easy to say, oh, well, I'm interested on this program's effect on child education. And then if you don't find a significant effect, oh, well, no, I'm interested on the effect of this other measure. So when you have a prospective analysis, it's more accountable and transparent because you have to decide your outcome variable from the very beginning. Whereas when you have retrospective evaluation, it's really easy to keep changing your outcome variable to try and find what's significant for you. And that's what we call p-hacking. Have you guys heard of p-hacking? It's when all you care about is getting the significant stars on your regression, so you'll make whatever regression you can to make that happen. And that's not actually good economics because it doesn't guarantee causality. So we do want to avoid that as much as possible. It's a dirty word in this class. Okay. And then finally, in a prospective evaluation, the treatment and comparison groups identified before the intervention, they're identified before the intervention. So basically, we already know what our treatment and control groups are going into our treatment effect. Whereas in our retrospective analysis, that's the hardest part. That's the worst and most awful part, is finding a good comparison group. So when you have prospective analysis, it's a lot easier in that sense. Okay, we are going to take a 10-minute break and return at 7:01. Does anyone have questions before we go? Okay, then you guys can go and come back in 10 minutes. Yeah, I'm gonna stop my video. Okay, we're going to start again. So we were just talking about, we're just about to start topic 5, efficacy studies and effectiveness studies. This is so hectic. I live with another professor and he's teaching right now too. So I'm like listening to engineering class right now. Hopefully you guys can't hear. It's very distracting. Okay. Oh, what am I doing? So the main role of impact evaluation is to provide evidence on program performance. So how well is the program doing so that governments can use this information. Also program managers, organizations, society, and other stakeholders or businesses. They want to know this information to make decisions on policy. What policies are most useful and what should be implemented. Okay. Impact evaluation results are especially useful when the conclusions can be applied to a broader population of interest. For example, if we're looking at a study on women in India and we want to know how to increase their political participation, for example, we can conduct an impact evaluation, but it's useful if our results can be extended to other countries or settings. So for example, there's this issue called external validity. So if a study lacks external validity, we can't make generalizable assumptions about the effectiveness given other locations. So if we don't have generalizable results, we can't make policy recommendations off one impact evaluation into other areas. So it's really important to have generalizable research so that we can extend it to multiple contexts. Okay, any questions? Can you guys hear this other class? Because it's really distracting me. I hope not. Okay. So in the early days of impact evaluations, generalizability, that's such a word, didn't happen at all because these impact evaluations were within a laboratory, really intense, really monitored, and very controlled. So basically, these experimenters would control the situation with very heavy involvement to ensure that there was high similarity between evaluation design and program implementation. However, when the research is so controlled, it tends to not be realistic. And maybe people in the study, their behavior will change in response to how involved the researchers are, and it won't be relatable to what would happen in the real life when there's no involvement. So these results tend to be less generalizable, and researchers in economics, when we look at impact evaluations, don't do this anymore. So they try to not be as involved in the setup. Okay. So, for example, this example of an efficacy study, say a program hires women to teach children basic literacy. Maybe they're working under laboratory settings, so they're under close watch of the researchers. In this setting, maybe we have super effective results. We see a huge improvement in children's education level because of these women teachers when it's closely watched. But in reality, maybe there's more problems that we don't see in the study. So maybe teachers are less likely to show up. Maybe the quality is worse when there's no one supervising them. Maybe they don't care as much about the children. And so in reality, the results are lower than what we would see in this study. So we really need to be careful of that when we're creating experiments, because we want them to be reflective of the true effect of the policy in a real life setting. Okay. So an example, an intervention, so pilot intervention just means an intervention for the very first time, introduces new medical treatment protocol. So that's kind of like new rules. They might work in a hospital where there's excellent managers and medical staff, but maybe the same intervention would not work in just a normal hospital where managers don't care as much and there's less staff. So that's always important to consider. And basically, we want our experiments to be reflective of reality to make sure that we're capturing accurate effects of treatment. Yes? Okay. So by contrast, effectiveness studies are interventions that take place in normal circumstances and use a lot less control. And so they really aim to find generalizable results that can be applied to a large population. So basically, we want our results to be generalizable beyond the sample that we're looking at. And then it can be considered generalizable if we can find similar program effects across various settings. So maybe our program on female participation in politics is really large in India, and then we find a small effect in an African context where there's a different culture and women respond differently. So we don't want that. We want our results to be generalizable. Okay. Topic 6 is complementary approaches. So as we mentioned before, impact evaluations are designed to answer cause and effect questions, but at the same time, we can use other strategies to have a more strong understanding of the impact of our program. Okay, so for example, when we're asking a cause and effect question, our impact evaluation can provide evidence as to whether there has been an effect, but it doesn't necessarily provide evidence on what the channel was. So for instance, say we're looking at the effect of giving a family a box of food every month on, what's that? On, what can we say, child's education. So we assume that maybe if a child has more energy, he'll go to school more. But we don't, our impact evaluation doesn't prove that unless we do things in conjunction to make sure that that is actually what is happening. So other things can be monitoring, for example, to make sure that yes, this family is getting this food and yes, this child is eating the food. So that must be driving our outcome. So yeah, as I said, monitoring is a good one to do in the same time. And just to make sure that what we're thinking is happening in our program is truly happening. And it also keeps track of costs and benefits. So for example, we'll talk about cost benefit analysis in a second. Of course, we need to monitor to track our costs. Okay. Second, we have ex ante simulations. So a simulation is when we don't actually run an experiment. We make a simulation about the expected effect of the policy on our outcome of interest. So instead of actually running a program and an impact evaluation, ex ante simulations are just making predictions about the future. These can be useful in some scenarios when they're trying to start a program and they want to try and find the general effect as well as the cost and how much of an impact there might be. I'm not going to talk anymore about ex ante simulations in this class. We're not interested in predictions. We're actually interested in measuring data that exists. There's so much variation in predictions that I don't know how useful it is in policymaking. But that's me. Okay, and then mixed methods approach. you guys remember talking about qualitative data and quantitative data. Mixed method combines the two. So this is really common in economic studies when we want to use qualitative data to strengthen our argument. So for example, maybe we can use qualitative data, so people's opinions, to understand why certain results may have been achieved or not. So there's different types of mixed method approach. Just so you guys know, I don't expect you at all to memorize this. Also, all the tests are going to be online also, so even if you did have to know it, you could just look it up. So don't stress about memorizing anything, really. Yeah, just in case you're nervous about all of this language that we're using, it's not important to remember. It's just for a broader understanding, really. Okay. So one type of mixed methods is convergent parallel, they call it. So basically, it's called parallel because the two methods start at the same time and we're using them together. So basically, we're collecting quantitative data and qualitative data to generate early results about how the program is being implemented and how it's perceived by the beneficiaries, whether they think it's good, how they think it's affecting them, and so on. Okay. And then explanatory sequential is when we have our qualitative data first. So we run all of our numbers, we estimate an effect, and then we look at qualitative data. So maybe it's questionnaires or conversations with people to try and develop systematic explanations of how the program really affected the outcome. So what is the driving mechanism? Questions? Okay. And then exploratory sequential is the other way around. So we start with our qualitative data, we start with our interviews or whatever non-number data, and we try and use it to clarify a research question that needs to be addressed. So maybe we go in community and we're saying, oh, well, we're trying to help this community increase children's education. What do you guys think needs to happen? And so we can use that to try and form a policy or a program. Okay, so that's how those qualitative and quantitative can go together. Okay, and then there's process evaluations, which is basically evaluating how closely reality followed to what we said wanted to happen. So we have a program and we have a guideline. How closely did our program follow to the documented guideline of operation? Are the groups that are supposed to receive treatment receiving treatment? Is the timeline being followed? Is the treatment quality up to standard? All of these things will affect our estimates. And if these things are not what we said that they're going to be, we're going to estimate an effect that might not be the effect of the program itself or the treatment. It might be effect of the fact that the treatment's not even receiving their treatment. You know what I'm saying? So we need to make sure that our procedure is being followed, or else we don't know what we're measuring. So we need to be very transparent, make sure that treatment is receiving treatment, control is not receiving treatment, etc. So this is a very important part of any impact evaluation. I mean, it's not possible with a retrospective, but if you have a prospective analysis, it needs to happen. Yes. Okay. And then I'm sure you guys have heard about in other classes, a cost-benefit analysis. So a cost-benefit analysis measures the total expected benefits of a program against the total expected cost. So to do this, it has to put a monetary value on both sides. So what is the total cost of our inputs and what is the benefit in monetary value? So yeah, adding cost information will allow us to answer the question, what is the benefit that a program delivers for a given cost. However, this can be kind of unethical in a way because we could be putting a monetary value on humans' lives. So, for instance, suppose a non-governmental organization is deciding whether they should expand a program which vaccinates babies to a new village. Doing so can prevent 50 deaths and cost the organization $5,000. Should they make this happen, they can save 50 babies' lives. Well, if they spend that $5,000, they're taking $5,000 away from maybe another life-saving program. So maybe other people could be dying because these people are living. So when you put costs on people's lives, it really becomes an ethical question. Okay. Similar to cost-benefit analysis, cost-effectiveness analysis will compare costs of a benefit, or the cost to the benefit, of course, across the multiple possible programs. So we're basically looking at what policy across several is the most effective in terms of cost. Of course, to measure the benefit side, we're always using impact evaluations. So the focus of this class will not be cost effectiveness or cost benefit, because adding up costs is really easy. The hard part is doing econometrics and finding a causal model. So that's the focus of our class. Choosing a good model and knowing what assumptions you need to make on it to ensure that you have causality. Okay. And then ethical considerations. Oh God. I like that we're at page 37 and I said I was going to finish today. Let's go. Okay, so of course, unlike other sciences like chemistry or biology, which can easily conduct experiments in a lab with germs or, I don't know, algae, we're interested in humans and human behavior and outcomes. And with that, there's ethical concerns. We can't play with a person's life. We can't say, oh, well, let's make this economy communist and let's make this economy capitalist and see which is better. That's not ethical because it's economies and people's lives that you're playing with. So, of course, that wouldn't happen. So, for example, sometimes we'll use policy experiments that rely on randomization, which we're obviously going to talk about later. This can have ethical concerns because within randomization for a program, you're choosing some people to receive treatment and some people to not. So you're denying others a treatment effect, which could have positive effects on their lives. So this could be unethical if we're hurting others to just measure the effect of a program. However, on the other hand, people argue it could be equally unethical to put in substantial money into programs that we don't even know if they're effective. So if we didn't run this randomization, maybe we're just putting money into a useless program that's making people worse off. So that's considered unethical too. So maybe there is some benefit of running experiments in the hopes that we can improve people's lives in the future, even though in the short term, some people might be harmed by being denied treatment. Yeah. Okay. So the most basic ethical principle in an evaluation is that basically the intervention with known benefits should not be denied or delayed just for the purpose of the evaluation. Yeah. So basically, the random assignment of program benefits can raise questions about denying programs to people that might otherwise be eligible. However, this might be necessary because, as we already talked about, the problem with program implementation is that there's always limited money So we need to make decisions about who is going to receive the program. We can't afford for everyone to get it, so somehow we need to measure the effect. If we could give it to everyone, we wouldn't need to conduct a program or an evaluation necessarily. Okay. So from an ethical standpoint, we can consider it ethical if everyone within who are eligible to participate in a program. So say we have a program where only people who earn under 1,500 pesos can enter. And so within everyone in that group, if it's chosen randomly who receives the treatment and who's in the control group, then it can be considered ethical because it was like a lottery. It was random who received treatment. That means that we're not putting any special privilege on one person over another when they're both in equal need. So in that way, randomization does fulfill the ethical requirement just because it's random, so we're not giving special treatment based on anything. Also, if the long-term benefit of implementing a policy for the whole population is greater than the individual short-term costs of the control group for not receiving treatment, it's considered beneficial and ethical. Of course, within ethical considerations of economics, we have to have a no harm principle, as in no harm is going to anyone in the treatment or control group. So we can't give someone a treatment that we know is going to make their economic or social outcomes worse. We're not going to make an experiment that says, hey, let's take away someone's house and see how that affects their economic outcomes. Like, no, like as you guys have noticed, most papers are kind of, when it's an experiment, it's always looking at positive effects because we can't negatively treat a person. That wouldn't be right. Okay. Also, ethical considerations also include producing research that is reproducible, transparent, objective, and honest. So this could be providing your data, your code, and providing proof that you're not just making up your results. Of course, we only want policy recommendations that are based on analysis that is true. So if economists are providing fake results to get published, that doesn't help society at all. So that's another big ethical consideration. Okay. So we already mentioned this, but the goal of impact evaluations is to take politics out of policymaking. We want it to be objective and based on data. I'm going to talk about this paper later because it's actually in chapter 3, but it's an example of an experiment that tries to find a positive effect using an experiment. So I'm going to skip this slide. So basically, to justify the costs and resources of an impact evaluation, because we want it to inform program decisions, it should be innovative. So it's testing a new promising approach. If it's too similar to another approach, why would we need to make another impact evaluation? We already have that data. We already have that effect measured. So it should be new. It should be replicatable so that it can be scaled up in general settings. So if we're looking at the effect within Pura of some program, we want to, in the end, apply it to all of Peru. So we need to make sure that it will be a similar effect, or it can be scaled up. If it's too expensive, then the government won't be able to afford to implement it for the whole country. It's not a useful program anyways. It should be relevant to program. So basically, it should be informative for an important policy decision. For example, maybe there's an existing program that they're considering if they should expand it or how they should allocate their budget. And then it should be untested. So we don't know, without the experiment, we don't know the effect of a program or other possibilities within either our particular context or for the global context in general. And yeah, and then relevant to policy, kind of already mentioned that. Topic 8, initiating an impact evaluation. Okay, so as we talked about, an important step of creating an impact evaluation is starting with the cause and effect question. These questions should be well defined and testable. You should be able to contrast the results of a treatment group against the comparison group. Although there may be more than one question that you're interested in, it is really important to state exactly what your evaluation is going to test. Okay, so what is your X variable? What is your Y variable? What outcomes are you going to collect? So once you figure out what your research question is and what you're interested in, you're going to conduct a theory of change, which is kind of like a hypothesis. Well, it's exactly a hypothesis. So how do you think the intervention is going to affect our outcome of interest? It's basically a statement of logic, how you think a particular program will reach its intended outcomes. So I think this box of food to the family will improve a child's nutrition because the child will eat the food and have a more varied diet, something like that. So it should be really intuitive. Whatever your area of research is will usually be guided by previous literature. So if you don't have a theory of change off the bat, I'm sure there's previous literature that can help you guide you to the right conclusion. Yeah. Working with the program stakeholders, so whoever is creating the program or has investments in the program, they can help create a theory of change with you. This will be more relevant if you're working on your thesis. You obviously don't have anyone but yourself and your supervisor, so you can always talk to your supervisor. And then the best time to develop the theory of change is obviously at the beginning of the design process. Especially when you have a prospective study, if you're building the program at the same time that you're analyzing the effect, you want to know what the goals of the program are and how you're going to achieve those goals. In the case of a retrospective study, like most of you guys will be doing for your thesis, your TA, you won't have this, but you should be able to look retrospectively at what outcomes you think they should be affected and in what direction. Okay, so from your theory of change, you'll have a results change. I can't speak. A results chain. So basically the connections between X and Y. So it can begin with resources available, to inputs, to outputs. And basically they should directly interact with each other and have a causal effect. So a basic results chain will map the following elements. We have inputs, resources that we use at the beginning of the project, including staffs and budget, whatever the treatment is, activities, so it can be actions taken or work performed to convert inputs into outputs. Outputs, obviously our outputs are the goods and services that the project activities produce. These are given to the treatment group. And then our outcomes are the results likely to be achieved once the treatment population has used these outputs. They're usually achieved in the short term to medium term, and we can't directly control the outputs or outcomes. And then our final outcomes can be something other than our outcomes. So maybe it's the final results achieved from the program. And basically our final outcome can be influenced by multiple factors, which is why we need a strong impact evaluation to isolate only this factor that we're interested in on the effect. So, an example. Suppose that you're concerned that people in poor neighborhoods eat less healthy food than people in rich neighborhoods. You think it's because there are less healthy food vendors or stores in poor neighborhoods. To test this, you offer subsidies to healthy food shops. So we talked about subsidies earlier. The government is giving money, or this organization is giving money to food shops that give healthy food. So the price will lower for these consumers. So we're looking at people in poor neighborhoods. So if you look at this figure, our inputs are the money, so the money that will be put to the subsidies. And then our activity is giving subsidies to these healthy food stores. From our inputs, we'll have our output, which is an increase in the number of healthy food stores that are selling nutritious foods like fruits and vegetables, and increased availability of these foods in poor neighborhoods. Our outcome will be the fact that these people in poor neighborhoods are eating more nutritious foods, okay? So that was our outcome goal. But of course, that's not our final outcome, because from eating healthy foods, there's a final consequence, which is the lower prevalence of obesity among people in poor neighborhoods. So people are eating healthier foods and obesity becomes less. Do you guys have any questions about a results chain? No? Great. Is everyone still paying attention, or are you looking at memes? Great. Okay. So that was basically a mechanism to look at our inputs, assess the causal channel, to finally get our output. And be careful, just because there's a correlation between our subsidy policy change and a decrease in obesity, we can't immediately from that say that the subsidy caused the outcome, the low reduction in obesity, okay? I'm sure you guys have been told that throughout your economics career. Causality does not equal causation. Yes. Okay. So choosing your outcome variable. How do we measure whether a program is successful or not? Well, we measure the success of our program through outcome variables. So we should choose outcome variables that are smart. So S is specific. So it should be a consistent and accurate measure. And it should be measurable. So for example, it needs to have a unit attached so that we can measure it in some sort of quantity. Attributable, so it needs to be specific to the policy. If it's an outcome that is random, we wouldn't expect it to be affected by our input, so it needs to be really random, and we need to understand why it would be affected. It has to be realistic, so it has to be data that we can obtain in a reasonable time. So this will be important for you guys with thesis, because I'm sure you all have brilliant ideas, but you're going to be limited by data. So make sure when you have a idea that you can obtain the data and outcomes in a reasonable time. And then of course, it has to be outcomes that are going to be targeted to the population that receives treatment. Okay. Any questions so far? I'm going to start talking about a paper, if not. No? Okay. So this paper is on our reading list for chapter 1. And I just wanted to start introducing you guys into economic literature. And it's kind of this is a perfect example of a program impact evaluation. So it's called Can iron fortified salts control anemia? Evidence from experiments in Bihar, which I think is India. Does anyone know what anemia is? Everyone's clear? I think it's the same word in Spanish, actually.
Yeah, the same.
Nice. Okay. So an iron fortified salt. I don't know why, but I can't see my chat right now. Wait. No. Okay. So, yeah. And then iron, typically, if you're anemic, you're low in iron. So basically, they're going to see the effect of food that is, they specifically put more iron in if it can help anemia. Okay. So, yeah. Iron deficiency anemia. So when people have anemia, it's because they aren't eating enough foods saturated in iron. It's really common among the poor worldwide if they don't have a varied diet, especially because iron is highly contained in red meats, which can be expensive. So maybe poor people aren't eating it as much, or they don't have access to it as much as people that are more wealthy. So basically, what's going on here? It's definitely preventable. Anemia, we can prevent it by just giving people more iron. These programs really struggle to reach the poorest and out of school children, and also men and the elderly. So this paper is looking at the impact of a potential strategy to address iron deficiency anemia in rural areas using salts fortified with iron and iodine. So basically it's the salt, which they just add more iron in to hopefully reduce the anemia rate in poor neighborhoods. Okay. So they're conducting a large-scale experiment. So they're using 400 different villages in Bihar to test impacts of selling both this salt that's fortified with iron, as well as giving it away for free. Why is this paper relevant? Well, iron deficiency is a big problem, and it's the most common nutrient deficiency in the world today. So the World Health Organization estimates that 1.6 billion people are anemic, and half of these cases are linked to iron deficiency specifically. So this iron deficiency is really common among populations with a low diet which doesn't eat much animal protein and eats a lot of rice or whole wheat. Okay. So specifically in Asia and South Asia, where there's a lot more vegetarians, for instance, in India, the Hindu religion, they don't eat cows and a lot tend to be vegetarian. So this population might be a lot more likely to have anemia than others. And then also across Asia, eats a lot of rice, which could also create more iron deficiency. Okay. So in Indonesia, a large-scale study of iron supplements found that 50% of women aged 15 and above and 40% of men were anemic at baseline before treatment. So half the females that they sampled were anemic and 40% of men, which is really high rate, especially that anemia is a really preventable illness. Okay, so in this study that the authors sampled, rates of anemia were really similar at 45% on average, which is higher for females at 54 and the elderly. So females appear to be more likely to have anemia than males. Also, nutrition, so what you eat, is the main cause of anemia. So basically in their sample group, they find that 31.8% of women have poor general nutrition, that they are considered underweight, which is of course contributing to rates of anemia. And nearly half of the children in the rural areas of their sample under the age of 5 are also likely to be stunted, which means that they just stop growing or they don't grow to their full potential due to lack of food. So stunting is a really big problem, which is completely attributed to lack of food. So it's important for policy because a large sample is affected by anemia. We see that. And not only is it important for a large population, there's also negative health consequences associated with anemia, such as weakness, fatigue, so you're a lot more tired. You can't think as fast, so slowing up to cognitive and physical growth. So you're less likely to develop educationally, or your brain is fast. You're not as likely to grow as tall. And even if a woman is pregnant and anemic, child mortality is higher. So there's a lot of negative health consequences. And although it's so common and it's a really serious thing that has negative consequences, not much has been done to reduce the presence. So for this reason, the authors really want to work on improving this outcome among rural populations. Anyone stop me at any time you have a question. You can use your microphone or chat. Okay. I think people are chatting me, but I can't open it. So basically this impact evaluation is offering an innovation. Economists have already explored the effect of providing villages with free iron supplements, and these effects were large and positive. However, providing villages with supplements are really expensive, and the take-up rate is low because it's hard to distribute these supplements, and it might not be practical in areas with poor resources, and especially people in rural settings that they're less likely to get this access to government supplies. So how do we make iron more obtainable and accessible? Iron fortification of food, so when we put iron in food, can be really a good solution because it requires no effort on the part of households. They're always going to need food, so they can buy this food like normal, except it has extra iron. So they're better off because it's the same price for food, but it's infused with iron. Okay. So they specifically look at salt because everyone salts their food. If not, you're a serial killer. Salt is delicious. So this seems like a logical food to put iron in. Okay. So there's a lot of reasons to think that putting iron in these foods can have positive effects on anemia levels, but we don't have any evidence. So this is what the authors are trying to do, fill this gap between evidence and policy recommendations. Okay, so they have two groups that they're going to look at the effect. They have individuals in households that are offered the salt for free. So they have a group that are given fortified iron salt for free, and then they're going to compare the effect for this group to two other groups. One is a control group that is comprised of households in villages where there's none available. They did not have access to this salt that is iron infused. And then the second control group is made of households in villages that were given, okay, so basically these households were not given it for free themselves, but they're within villages where the salt was given to other households for free. Okay, so our outcomes are going to be hemoglobin count, which is basically blood, the part of blood that contains iron. I'm not a biologist at all, so I can't explain that more, but hemoglobin, and then also anemia. So anemia is just a dummy variable if the household or the individual has anemia. Who can tell me what a dummy variable is? It's also the same as a binary variable. Anyone?
Yes.
What's a dummy variable? Nadi? A dummy variable?
Sure.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So a dummy variable is a variable that takes either 0 or 1, depending if the thing you're observing, if the thing you're observing has some characteristic. For example, it could be 1 if it's a female, and 0 if it's a man, or vice versa.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Nicholas. So dummy variable will only take values 0 or 1 normally, and yeah, it represents some sort of characteristic. So in this case, a dummy variable would equal to 1 if they have anemia and 0 if they don't. Okay, so it's either a yes or no. Okay, so what they find, they actually, as convincing as this project was, they find no significant impacts of the Sales experiment on hemoglobin. So they wanted to see an increase in hemoglobin because they want to see an increase in iron in the blood. And they don't, because as you can see here, it says the point estimate is 0.033 grams with a 95% confidence interval, where 0 is contained in the middle. So when we have 0 in the middle of contained in our confidence interval, that means we cannot reject the null hypothesis that our effect is different from 0. I'll repeat that. So when we have 0 in our confidence interval, we cannot reject null hypothesis that our effect is different from 0. So this experiment, they do not find a significant effect of the increase in hemoglobin. So there's no increase in iron in the blood, which is what we wanted to see. And they also don't find a positive effect on anemia. So the number of people with anemia did not decrease either. So basically the conclusions is that maybe this salt isn't enough to actually reduce anemia in the population. They might need the supplementation or something, but it's just not sufficient. Okay, and then this is the table that looks at the effects. So you can see panel A is the hemoglobin, so the iron contained in blood, and then panel B is anemia. And so I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with looking at results tables, but so this is our outcome variable. And then this is for the whole population. You can see all, and then they break it by gender, female, male, by age. So children, adults, elderly, and then female adults, and then infants. So the effect size, for example, this is the treatment effect they estimate here, 0.045 for all adults on hemoglobin. And then the standard error is contained in brackets, 0.048. So you guys can see this is not significant. For one, because there's no star, but secondly, you know how to calculate it on your own. Just by dividing, you divide the effect size by the standard error, and it will give you the t-value, right? And so if your t-value is, for example, at the 5%, if it's greater than 1.96, then it would be significant at the 5% level. Do you guys want me to rate that, or?
No, it's okay.
Okay. So yeah, just dividing the effect size by the standard error will give you the t-value, and that tells you whether your effect is significant or not. So they actually find no significant effects on either hemoglobin or anemia. So this shows us that maybe they shouldn't spend the cost on implementing this policy because it doesn't actually affect our outcome of interest. So even though that seems like a bad result, it's good to know, right? Information is power. Okay, any questions on that paper? None. Okay. We're gonna do this paper tomorrow, or not tomorrow, on Monday, because I'm gonna spend more than 9 minutes and I don't want to keep you guys wait. So with that, I'm going to end class here, unless you guys want to ask me any questions before we go. You have 9 minutes. Lack of iron, Mackenzie.
I have one question actually.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So, assuming that in fact the salt was a good idea, but how would we actually know if it was actually going to work? Because they are giving the salt for free. I'm assuming that the salt wouldn't be given for free in the real life scenario. Wouldn't there be a kind of distortion?
Yeah, maybe that's true. But they assumed that everyone buys salt anyways. So if they keep the price the same for the salt, they think that people will consume salt in the same way that they had before. So that's the reason. But that's true in the normal case. If they give it for free, and then they might find a super positive effect, but in reality, if there's a cost to it, maybe people aren't willing to buy it, so it wouldn't make a difference anyway. So yes, that's something to consider when you're making an experiment.
Miss, I was wondering if that experiment is still going to this day or it's not.
That experiment, they're not going to take further just because they don't find significant effects. So they wouldn't push for it to be implemented. Maybe they'll look for other strategies to increase iron and improve anemia. Okay, Max. Any questions about the referee report? Okay, here's a question. Do you guys prefer the meeting that we had today or the webinar that we had on Monday? You can send me a comment in the chat or you can speak out loud. Meeting. This way. Is it okay?
I think this is okay.
All right. I personally like this one better because I feel like you guys were more talkative. So let's try, I'll change the notes to this, but we can reevaluate in another week if we decide, because the class size is pretty small, so I think this is kind of nicer. Also, I just want to say that you guys can also ask me questions in Spanish. I do understand. I mean, I'm intermediate, so I might be embarrassed to reply in Spanish, but you can ask me in Spanish and I'll reply in English. Or if you need to email me about something, also fine. Yeah, okay. In that case, I'll see you guys on Monday. I'll probably be in Canada because I'm going back home in light of this coronavirus situation, but I'll see you all on Zoom. Okay, I'm going to end then. Have a great weekend doing everything in your house. Goodbye.
Take care.
Bye.